I like big books and I cannot lie. La 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 la. Oh. Okay. Vocal exercise, you know? Red Mars is about the colonization of Mars, the planet. It's called Red Mars because Mars is red and it looks like that, you know? So. When the book starts, it starts on part 1. Swear I'm not shitposting right now. Okay, part 1 is Festival Night. And Festival Night was like the celebration of this new Mars town. Like, but you know, like one of the, it's like either it's the first city on Mars, and they're having like a, like, you know, like an grand opening ceremony. It's the big festival of their town being created and finished. And there's like thousands of people who live there now. And so we're celebrating. And our narrator is Frank Chalmers. And Frank is a real guy who is on Mars. He was actually part of the first 100 people on Mars who, you know, started it all. So Frank Chalmers, he, like, you know, gives a speech. Then he goes outside and he, like, kicks a trash can and punches the wall. But the wall is made out of, like, this crazy, like, micro protein fiber, and it actually just absorbs his fist. And then the energy of the punch is absorbed into the wall, because that's like the structure that keeps them in the city on Mars. Frank Chalmers is kind of like Buzz Aldrin, as in Buzz Aldrin was the second man to walk on the moon, and Frank Chalmers was he had a guy who went first. So in that way, Frank Chalmers is a lot like Buzz Aldrin because he had a guy who went first. And that guy was Neil Armstrong. And Neil Armstrong is John Boone. But I can just call him Neil Armstrong if that keeps it, you know, if that's simpler for you. Anyway, John Boone is the face of, like, going to Mars, and Frank Chalmers is, like, the brain. You know, he's like the guy behind John Boone, and they're, like, best friends, or they're supposed to be, until Frank orchestrates his murder by inciting the first race war on Mars. Because there's, like, this Arab community, and Frank goes and he talks to the Arab community, and he's like, John does not like you guys. And they're like, we don't like John because he doesn't like us. And he's like, yeah, I know, John sucks. I'll go talk to him. But then he's also like, nobody's guarding the tool shed tonight. So then one of the young Arab men, literally at the instruction, like, Frank Chalmers is like, this is where he'll be. This is how you hide it. This is how you get away with it. And then the kid goes and he kills John Boone. Fucking murders him. But when he met with Frank Chalmers, Frank shook his hand and he stuck poison tablets, like, it's like it's like fertilizer for, like, the agriculture of Mars, like, for their farms. But he sticks, like, this pesticide patch onto the kid, like, he, like, shakes his hand with it and then throws it away. And then that kid goes and murders John Boone. They fucking beat his ass and dragged him out into the Martian surface. Like, they took him outside. and just like left his body there, and nobody knew where he was, so they didn't find him in time. And then and then John dies, and then 6 hours later the poison kills that kid, and Frank, he just sits back and prepares for the future. And that's where the first part ends. He's like, let's see what I can do with this planet. And then there was a girl that was there for the festival night. Her name is Maya Twatnova. She's Russian. I've always described her as like a James Bond girl, you know? And he saw Maya on festival night, and they were like really awkward around each other. You know how it is, like when people are awkward around each other. He's like, "Hi, Maya," and she's like, "Hi, Frank." But then they like don't really say much. Yeah, it was like that. And then John dies, and John was like everybody's friend, because they're all part of the first 100. And so now the second part, not chapter, the second part is part 2, the voyage out. So now we are back in time, and we are on the voyage to Mars, told from the perspective of Maya Twatnova. And she is a Twatnova. You have no idea. So that's like right where we are. Maya, she's kind of like the leader of the Russian group. Her name's Twatnova, but she's not to be underestimated, okay? She is a boss bitch from the good old communist days of Russia. And she doesn't trust men, but she likes men. And she's like, this isn't a conversation, chat. This guy in chat, I'm not having a conversation with you. I'm doing my best to summarize a book, and it's really hard to do. Okay, so shut up. I could just say she's from Ohio, actually. She's from the communist of the United Socialist States of Ohio. State of Ohio. I'm just saying she has an accent, and she's got a different culture. Then there's like the Americans, and they're like super like bossy, and like, you know, they've got like their titles. And she looks at Frank, and she's like, Frank is the leader of the Americans, and I'm kind of like the leader of the Russians. And then they like bone in the garden on the spaceship, and then Frank just like, he's like having a good time, you know? Everybody's getting ready to go to Mars, and they're like, we're gonna be together for the rest of our lives, you know? Let's be good people. And the fucking psychologist is just like standing in the corner, like writing notes. His name is Michelle. And anyways, Frank and Maya bone, because like Maya thinks it's like, she's like, I can't like have sex with everybody else because they like are like lower, like they like work for me, and that means that they're just sleeping with me to like get ahead in their careers. And you know, there's like a power imbalance, and she's like, I've done that before. I'm not gonna do it with anybody here. And then she's like, Frank though, he's the leader of the Americans, and it's kind of like a power couple. So she tries it with him. But then Frank's like, she doesn't like the way Frank is. The way he breathes gives her the ick. And she was like, it's just kind of like a fling anyways. And she's like, we could still be friends. And as we all know, Frank will definitely want to be friends. She said, well, when she looked into his eyes, it was like a house with nobody home. Just like empty, empty eyes. And she's like, I don't know if I can like talk to you anymore. And then that was the last time they had sex. Even in 2061 in outer space, the friend zone, a friend zone man is about to change the world. All right, was that a good enough summary? I always try to plan it out in my head, and I always butcher it. Am I leaving anything out? Do you want to add anything, chat? So he murders because he got dumped? Maybe. We don't know. Like, we don't know why he starts a race war and murders his supposed best friend, who he clearly has, like, a jealous rage about. Oh, and that also bothers Frank, is John Boone. He's like blonde and he's like charismatic and he's like the face of Mars because he's the first man on Mars. And then he got to go along with them even though he's already been to Mars and he's got like the radiation exposure of Chernobyl, and he shouldn't even have been able to go and be in part of the first 100 because he gets to be the number one anyways. And then John's going and Frank is like kind of mad about it. I don't know. That's all we know so far. And people like John, and Frank is like, it was all because of me. I'm the reason John even got to go. Yeah, so far, literature analysis says that Frank is a little bitch. Oh God, I was supposed to practice for this. I believe that is the symbol for delta. Delta V. V for velocity. Yep. If I had only read ahead. Delta V. V for velocity. Delta for change. In space, this is the measure of the change in velocity required to get from one place to another. Delta V. Thus, a measure of the energy required to do it. I told you there would not be a test this week, chat. I feel quite embarrassed to admit this, but it's been about 10 years since I read a book. Don't be embarrassed. At least you've read a book. I know people who make it like they've read I know someone who's read one chapter book because they were required to. At least they can read, I guess. You don't have to read books, but at least they can read. But they just don't read books. So, if you've read books before, I guess it doesn't matter if it's been 10 years. Okay, energy, delta, change, velocity. In space, this is the measure of the change in velocity required to get from one place to another. Thus, a measure of the energy required to do it. Everything is moving already, but to get something from the moving surface of the Earth into orbit around it requires a minimum delta V of 10 kilometers per second. To leave Earth's orbit and to fly to Mars requires a minimum delta V of 3.6 kilometers per second. And to orbit Mars and land on it requires a delta V of about 1 kilometer per second. The hardest part is leaving Earth behind, for that is by far the deepest gravity well involved. Climbing up that steep curve of space-time takes tremendous force, shifting the direction of an enormous inertia. History, too, has an inertia. In the 4 dimensions of space-time, particles or events have directionality. Mathematicians trying to show this draw what they call world lines on graphs. In human affairs, individual world lines form a thick tangle, curling out of the darkness of prehistory and stretching through time. A cable the size of the earth itself, spiraling round the sun on a long curved course. That cable of tangled world lines is history. Seeing where it has been, it is clear where it is going. It is a matter of simple extrapolation. For what kind of delta V would it take to escape history, to escape an inertia that powerful, and carve a new course? The hardest part is leaving Earth behind. Hello. Doesn't feel quite so hard these days, not gonna lie. For real. Well, we know where we're going, but we don't know where we've been, and we know what we're knowing, but we can't say what we've seen. I don't know what that's from. Why do I have to pee again already? I'll be right back. I'm so sorry. Hello. Praxematic? Have you been here the whole time? Thank you. No, you haven't. Okay, that's all anybody's been talking about. Thank you. My new shirt. Yeah, I'm really happy. I'm never making anything out of these squares ever again. They're so tedious. But I'm glad it was this. No, okay, don't listen to chat. We're reading a book now, and you barely missed anything. Unless you missed all the other book clubs. In which case, it's gonna be fun. You know, it's a big book. I bet you don't even need to know what's going on in most of the parts. Just enjoy the story. And the colonization of Mars. Settlement of Mars. Or colonization. I don't know what word. Okay, awesome. Well, hi Praxematic in the VODs in the future. I love you. Hope you enjoy the book. And goodbye, Praxematic in the current. I hope you enjoy everything. Depends on if there are Martians. Only in Arcades simulations. Streaming in 4D. Only on Twitch. Alright, so where we left off after my last time I read was she found herself becoming more passionate than ever before. She really wanted to please him. And then, just before orgasm, she looked up at his face, and it was like looking in the windows of an empty house. That was the last time. And then, Delta V. The Delta V formula for change in velocity required to move. And history too has inertia. And what would the Delta V be to escape history? The hardest part is leaving Earth behind. Why are these pages so yellow? Because I found it in a shop in England of used books, and they're literally dying and literally falling apart. And I found these are vintage copies that I shouldn't even be reading. I should buy like a newer copy. I'm getting prehistoric mold from these books. But you know what? It's worth it for you, chat. And also because I didn't know what else to read. And I started reading this without you guys, and I was like, damn, chat would love this. I'm not gonna smell it. Okay, let us continue. The form of the Ares gave a structure to reality. Oh, the Ares is the ship they are on. The form of the Ares gave a structure to reality. The vacuum between Earth and Mars began to seem to Maya like a long series of cylinders, bent up at their joints at 45-degree angles. There was a runner's course, a kind of steeplechase, around Taurus C, and at each joint she slowed down in her run and tensed her legs for the increased pressure of the two 22.5-degree bends, and suddenly she could see up the length of the next cylinder. It was beginning to seem a rather narrow world. Can you explain what that means? The ship that they're in is made out of cylinders for, they used to be like tanks for like stuff, like fuel or something. I don't know. They're like repurposed fuel tanks that were assembled in space and connected together, kind of like those kids' toys. And anyways, there's a big long shaft, and then there's 8 Tauruses, which are also made of cylinders. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then those are, or I don't know. Okay, I can't remember the whole description, but I don't know. It's like a tube with other tubes attached to it. Taurus. I'm saying Taurus. Is there another way to say it? Aren't we just proud of me for even knowing that that's a word? Come on. Anyways, and then they're stuck. Oh, that was for chat. Okay, sorry. Wow, I'm so pretentious. So yeah, there's like tubes stuck off of tubes, and then there's like a bunch of tubes, and they're all connected to a long big tube. And that's why they're like Taurus D. And they mean like D as in dick. Okay. It's a series of tubes. They said it looks like not like knobby donuts stuck onto a stick with toothpicks. The form of the Ares gave a structure to reality. The vacuum between Earth and Mars seemed to Maya like a long series of cylinders, bent up at their joints at 45-degree angles. There was a runner's course, kind of a steeplechase, around Taurus C, and at each joint she slowed down in her run and tensed her legs for the increased pressure of the two 22.5-degree bends. And suddenly she could see up the length of the next cylinder. It was beginning to seem a rather narrow world. Perhaps in compensation, the people inside began to get somehow larger. The process of shedding their Antarctic masks continued. And every time someone displayed some new and hitherto unknown characteristic, it made all those who noticed it feel that much freer. And this feeling caused more hidden traits to be revealed. One Sunday morning, the Christians aboard, numbering a dozen or so, celebrated Easter in the Bubble Dome. It was April back home, though the Aries season was midsummer. After their service, they came down to the D dining hall for brunch. Maya, Frank, John, Arkady, and Sax were at a table drinking cups of coffee and tea. The conversations among them and with other tables were densely interwoven, and at first only Maya and Frank heard what John was saying to Phyllis Boyle, the geologist who had conducted the Easter service. I understand the idea of the universe as a super being, and all its energy being the thoughts of this being. It's a nice concept, but the Christ story? John shook his head. Do you really know the story? Phyllis asked. I was brought up Lutheran in Minnesota, John replied shortly. I went to confirmation class, had the whole thing drilled into me. Which, Maya thought, was probably why he bothered to get into discussions like this. He had a displeased expression that Maya had never seen before, and she leaned forward a bit, suddenly concentrating. She glanced at Frank. He was gazing into his coffee cup as if in a reverie, but she was sure he was listening. John said, "You must know that the Gospels were written decades after the event, by people who never even met Christ, and that there are other Gospels which reveal a different Christ, Gospels that were excluded from the Bible by a political process in the 3rd century. So he's kind of a literary figure, really, a political construct. We don't know anything about the man himself." Phyllis shook her head. "That's not true." "But it is," John objected. This caused Sachs and Arcady to look up from the next table. "Look, there's a history to all this stuff. Monotheism is a belief system that you see appearing in the early herding societies. The greater their dependence on sheep herding, the more likely their belief in a shepherd god. It's an exact correlation. You can chart it and see it. And the god is always male because these societies were patriarchal. There's a kind of archaeology, an anthropology, a sociology of religion that makes all of this perfectly clear. How it came about and what needs it fulfilled." Phyllis regarded him with a small smile. "I don't know what to say about that, John. It's not a matter of history. After all, it's a matter of faith. Do you believe in Christ's miracles?" "The miracles aren't what matter. It's not the church or its dogma that matters. It's Jesus himself who matters. That matters." "But he's just a literary construct," John repeated doggedly. "Something like Sherlock Holmes or the Lone Ranger. And you didn't answer my question about the miracles." Phyllis shrugged. "I consider the presence of the universe to be a miracle. The universe and everything in it. Can you deny it?" "Sure," John said. "The universe just is. I define a miracle as an action that clearly breaks known physical law. Like traveling to other planets? No, like raising the dead. Doctors do that every day. Doctors have never done that." Phyllis looked nonplussed. "I don't know what to say to you, John. I'm kind of surprised. We don't know everything, so to pretend we do is arrogance. The creation is mysterious. To give something a name like the Big Bang and then think you have an explanation, it's bad logic, bad thinking. Outside of your rational scientific thought is an enormous area of consciousness, an area more important than science. Faith in God is a part of that. And I suppose you either have it or you don't. She stood. I hope it comes to you. She left the room. After a silence, John sighed. Sorry, folks. Sometimes it still gets to me. Whenever scientists say that they're Christians, Sachs said, I take it to be an aesthetic statement. The Church of Wouldn't It Be Pretty to Think So, Frank said, still looking into his cup. The Easter egg hunt is going to be awkward. The Church of Wouldn't It Be Pretty to Think So, Frank said, still looking into his cup. Sachs said, they feel we're missing a spiritual dimension of life that earlier generations had, and they attempt to regain it using the same means. He blinked in his owlish way, as if the problems were disposed of by being defined. That brings in so many absurdities, John exclaimed. You just don't have faith, Frank said, egging him on. John ignored him. People who in the lab are as hard-headed as can be. You should see Phyllis grilling the conclusions her colleagues draw from their data. And then suddenly they start using all kinds of debaters' tricks and evasions, qualifications, fuzzy thinking of every kind, as if they were an entirely different person. You just don't have faith, Frank repeated. Well, I hope I never get it. It's like being hit by a hammer in the head. John stood and took his tray to the kitchen. The rest looked at each other in silence. I think you've got it backwards, Soul Shadow. This is John talking. I just have the voice of a Phyllis. Okay, well, I hope I never get it. John stood and took his tray to the kitchen. The rest looked at each other in silence. It must have been, Maya thought, a really bad confirmation class. Clearly, none of the others had known any more about her, Clearly, none of the others had known any more than her about this side of their easygoing hero. Who knew what they would learn next? About him or any of them? News of the argument between John and Phyllis spread through the crew. Maya wasn't sure who was telling the story. Neither John nor Phyllis seemed inclined to speak of it. Then she saw Frank with Hiroko, laughing as he told her something. Walking by them, she heard Hiroko say, "You've got to admit, Phyllis is right about that part. We don't understand the why of things at all." Frank, then, sowing discord between Phyllis and John. And, not a trivial point, Christianity was still a major force in America, and elsewhere. If word got around back home that John Boone was anti-Christian, it could give him problems. And that wouldn't be such a bad thing for Frank. They were all getting media play on Earth, but if you watched some of the news and features, it became clear that some were getting more than others, and this made them seem more powerful. And so they became more powerful, in fact, by association. Among this group were Vlad and Ursula, whom she suspected were more than just friends now, Frank, Sax, all people who had been well known before their selection, and none so much as John. So that any diminution in Earth's regard for one of them might have a kind of corresponding effect on their status within the Ares. This, at any rate, seemed to be Frank's operating principle. At least we're all anti-Christian, chat. Just try to stay calm. We almost got a circle jerk going. Stay calm. Vlad and Ursula are probably from the eastern side of the first expedition to Mars. Speak for thyselves, heathens. Hell yeah, be yourself. Do your thing. Next. It is a big book. Red Mars. Okay. It felt as if they were confined to the interior of a hotel with no exits, without even any balconies. The oppression of hotel life was growing. They had been inside now for 4 long months, but it was still less than half of their trip. And none of their carefully designed physical surroundings or daily routines could hasten its end. Then, one morning, the second flight team was dealing with another of Arcady's problem runs, when all at once, red lights burned on several screens. A solar flare has been detected by the solar monitoring equipment, Rhea said. Arcady stood quickly. That's not me, he exclaimed, and leaned over to read the screen nearest him. He looked up, met his colleague's skeptical stares, grinned. Sorry, friends, this is the real wolf. An emergency message from Houston confirmed it. He could have faked those as well, but he was headed for the nearest spoke, and there was nothing they could do. Fake or not, they had to follow. If you don't know, Arcady is he's like the evil genius behind their simulations that they run to practice for landing on Mars. So he's just been like, Martians are attacking. All of the engines just blew up because they were installed wrong. Then, like, going through every scenario. So, there's a solar flare warning, and he's like, it's not me, I swear. I didn't say, I mean, I'm being harsh. Fake or not, they had to follow. In fact, a big solar flare was an event they had simulated many times before. Everyone had tasks to perform, quite a few of them, in a very short time. So, they ran around the Tauruses, cursing their luck and trying not to get in each other's way. There was a lot to do, as battening down was complicated and not very automated. In the midst of dragging plant trays into the plant shelter, Janet yelled, "Is this one of Arcady's tests?" "He says not." Shit. They had left Earth during the low point in the 11-year sunspot cycle, specifically to reduce the chance of a flare like this occurring. And here it was anyway. They had about half an hour before the first radiation arrived. And no more than an hour after that, the really hard stuff would follow. Emergencies in space can be as obvious as an explosion or as intangible as an equation. But their obviousness has nothing to do with how dangerous they are. The crew's senses would never perceive the subatomic wind approaching them, and yet it was one of the worst things that could have happened, and everyone knew it. They ran through the Tauruses to get their bit of battening done. Plants had to be covered or moved to protected areas. The chickens and pigs and pygmy cows and the rest of the animals and birds had to be herded into their own little shelters. Seeds and frozen embryos had to be collected and carried along. Sensitive electrical components had to be boxed or likewise carried along. When they were done with these high-speed tasks, they yanked themselves up the spokes to the central shaft as fast as they could, and then flew down the central shaft tube to the storm shelter, which was directly behind the tube's aft end. Hiroko and her biosphere team were the last ones in, banging through the hatch a full 27 minutes after the initial alarm. They hurtled into the weightless space, flushed and out of breath. Has it started yet? Not yet. What the fuck? We're 74 pages in. This isn't even as far as I read before I decided to read it to chat. Has it started yet? Not yet. They plucked personal dosimeters, dosimeters? Really? Dosimeters? Dosimeters. Okay, that's what I assumed. Radiation detectorators. Right. They plucked personal They plucked personal dosimeters from a Velcro pad of them and pinned them to their clothing. The rest of the crew already floated in the semi-cylindrical chamber, breathing hard and nursing bruises and a few sprains. Dosimeter. It's the thing that detects it's the meter. What the fuck are they called? It's the gauge that reads radiation levels. Oh, it's a strip of paper that changes color the worse radiation you get. Yeah, so it's something that detects the amount of radiation around you. I have to pee again. Probably because of all the radiation. Thank you for your